Hey guys, how is everything going? So today we're going to talk a little bit about Cursor, and for this reason we have invited Marco Rivadeneira, which is our CTO and co-founder. Marco, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Efrain. And you?
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, everything great. So excited for the topic that you're going to talk about. So yeah, for an intro, Symbiosis is a company. We are a marketplace that connect the companies in the US with software talent in the Americas. So if you are hiring talent, I'm going to leave the link in a moment in the chat. But yeah, without any other preamble, let's start with this. Marco, the audience is all yours.
Thanks. Can you give me permission to share screen?
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here with all of you. I want to take you with me in a journey into discovering a little bit more of Cursor, getting a hands-on experience with it, and get more familiar with the basics of what we can do with it. We will do a few demos and build some simple applications here. So here's a little bit of what we are going to cover today. So first of all, we are going to cover how to get up and running, some of the basics on how to use AI assisted uh, assistance as cursor. Then I will also share some tips and we will build some live demos. And finally, we will have some questions. Okay, so first of all, how do we get started? So it's really easy. Cursor works as a IDE. It's a version or a flavor of Visual Studio Code. So first of all, we will go to cursor.com and then there you can download the Cursor version for Mac, Windows, or Linux. It's really easy. It's same as installing Visual Studio Code. So I won't do the installation here right now because I already have it set up, but it's just clicking through the installer and it will set everything for you. So if you already have Visual Studio Code, it will allow you to import and migrate all your configuration and all your extensions into the Cursor IDE. So it will be really transparent for you. Once you have it installed, you either need to create an account in Cursor or sign in if you already have one, and you can just start using it on the free tier. So this will allow you to get going really quickly and start experimenting with it. And after you see if it's something that's working for you and you like how it works, you can start, you can look into the paid version, which is $20 a month. And that will give you a lot more flexibility and a lot more power and lift the restrictions on how much you can use it. So some of the essentials that we need to know, and I will show you this in a bit, is that we will use Command or Control P to show the command palette. So that's the standard command that we are already used to if we are using Visual Studio Code. So that will show you all the commands that you can run inside your IDE, and you can either run standard commands or use search for a specific cursor commands there. Then we also have the AI chat panel. So we can trigger that using Command L or Control L, which will open a side panel with a chat that we can use to ask Cursor about our project. We can tell it what we want it to do, and it can allow us to work in a bigger context. So that way we can work with the whole project. Also, like if we are trying to do something that it's specific to a file, maybe we're working in a file and we want to do something in that line, or we want to create to help us, Cursor to help us understand something in that code, we can always use Command K, which will open the chat function directly on the editor. So that will be more localized, and that's something that can help you do things quickly without having a full chat on with Cursor. Another interesting feature is a composer feature, which allows to work in multiple files. I think that this one is also helpful, but I like using the chat panel mainly, where we can tag the files that we want to work on, and it can allow us to be a little more direct and have more context. So in a bit, I will show you the UI for Cursor, but here is a little of the comparison between other tools that like using GitHub Copilot or Visual Studio Code with other AI tools like ChatGPT, for example. So I think one of the biggest advantages of Cursor is that it's already built into the IDE, and it's able to actually read everything on your project. So it will index your whole project, and you can even add other context data to it. So for example, if you are working with a specific framework, or you're using some libraries or internal documentation, you can give that context Cursor. You can teach it about those documents that you're using, or even share like a URL with it so that it will go there and index that for you, and that will be used then on your project while you're working on it. It also allows you to have more control on which models you're using. So by default, Cursor will select the best model for the task that you're trying to do. But there are some times where you want more power. So for example, if you're trying to do something that is really complex, or you have a really big code base, you might want to switch to one of the more powerful models like Opus Max, or uh, which will give you like a lot more context windows. So with the regular models, you only get I think it's 20,000 tokens for context, and with the max mode, you can get up to 200,000 tokens for the context. You can also use Sonnet, which is also really advanced, and the only disadvantage of this is that you have a limited number of calls to those advanced modes. Once you reach that limit, you can turn on the pay-as-you-go pricing model, so that will allow you to keep using those advanced models and pay for the operations that you do with them on top of the monthly fee. So let's dive in now. First, we will look at a project that I have prepared. It's a really simple project now, and we will use Cursor to help us understand a little bit of what that project does, how we can create functions on that project, fix some bugs on it, and even explore how we could create some unit tests for it. Okay, a second while I search for the window. Okay, so here we have a really simple project running. This is a to-do app. So as you can see, this is just an HTML file with everything on it, but you don't need me to tell you what it does. We can ask our AI assistant here. So if we use, for example, the command I was telling you before, uh, Control K, we can ask cursor to describe what this file is doing. And then it will analyze the code and it will give us an answer. In this case, since we are editing online, it will create this comment for us, which describes what it read on the file. So here it tells that it's a basic HTML file. We are using Vue.js2 and we are loading it from CDN. It has some responsive design, and then here it gives us a little context on what the app does, and like, we can understand a little bit better through this. Another option is that, and we can, for example, like I can reject the changes that they did, so it will just go back to how it was before. Then we can also use the chat window, and here we can ask, what does this project do? And we will get a similar response as the one we got before. Well, it's taking a little bit. So sometimes I think that's one of the disadvantages. Sometimes the generation process or analysis can take a little bit if your connection is not so fast, or if you have use a lot of your tokens too. But I think that's why also it's important to select what we want Cursor to help us do and what things we can do on our own too. So here again, it gives us a little more detailed description of what the simple app is doing. Um, give us like which frameworks it's using, the styling, how we are storing the to-dos, and it even tells us like there might be some issues. So if we are expecting the app to manage storage and to keep that into in the local storage or some store somewhere else, so that when we open the app again, everything is there. It's telling us that that's not going to happen because it's only using memory storage. So then we could ask Cursor to help us do something to fix that for example. So we want to store the to-dos in local storage, for example, so that when the user opens the app again, everything is there like the last time. So then it will analyze the code again and it will propose changes to it so that way we can achieve that functionality. So for example, here is doing something really simple. Right now it's just proposing that we add two new methods. One is the mounted method, so whenever the app mounts, it will read from the local storage the item to dos, and if it finds something, it will parse a JSON string that should be stored there and assign that to our to dos list on the app. It will also add the save to dos method, which will just create JSON string from all the to dos that we have on the app and save that to local storage. It also took care of adding that call so whenever we add a new to do or whenever we delete to do on our app. So that way it will automatically save what we are trying to do. Something else that we could ask it to do is, for example, how could we test that this is actually working? So now it's suggesting that we use jest, and we can see that it's writing the test for us here now. And once it's done, it will show us the new test file that it has created. And it's important for us to review everything that Cursor does for us. So we are sure that it's actually doing what we expected and that we understand what it's building. So I think something important to know is that some of the time that we're saving for writing code is going to be now spent reviewing and making sure that what we are doing is what we expected. So that way we can focus more on the quality and creating more maintainable applications than creating boilerplate code and building things that are sometimes really repetitive. So here also we can see that since this is a really simple project, which we didn't have set up with uh, packages or anything, it realized that it was having issues with importing Vue because it wasn't available. So now it's going to try different strategies for that. And sometimes it will be able to fix things on their own, but sometimes it will just get stuck in a loop, which is expected because we are not giving it a lot of context right now. We're just asking it to do really broad things without thinking ourselves about the steps that we will need to accomplish these more complex tasks. So some of the tips that we're going to talk about later is how to make sure that we plan ahead and that we are being mindful about what we are telling Cursor to do and how we are telling it to do it. So that way it's we get a better results and our success rate is higher. So now we can see that it was able to generate the code. It even created a package JSON for us, set up for Jest, um, another, well, I think this was the test file that didn't work. So we can now see through the package JSON that we can run the commands test and test watch, and it even suggests us how to do it. So first we will need to run npm install, which will install the dependencies for our project. And then we could run npm test to actually run the tests. So here we can see that it's throwing an error because it's not finding an environment variable. So what we can do is that we can use this same context and we can tell Cursor that we're not able to run the command because of that. So you can see here that it actually references the lines that I on the terminal that I had selected, so that way Cursor knows where to get the context from. So now it knows that it's missing another package that needs to be installed, and it will change that for us. And then now it even runs the test. So it ran the npm install command and now tried to run the test. And then again, it realized that they were falling. So now it will try to fix those failing tests for us and make them work in a way that's still testing what we wanted. So it's not just trying to make them pass mindlessly. So now we can see that it ran again the test and everything is passing. So now we can take a closer look at the file and make sure that it's doing what we expected, that it's testing thing like we wanted, and we can continue building our app. So like, this was a really simple example of what we can do with a project like that. It was like a really high level overview, but now we will get a little deeper on it. So some of the tips that are really important is we need to be as specific as we can. So if we just give it really broad instructions, it will build something resembling what we want, but we are going to probably going to have to do a lot of iterations trying to polish it and to get it where we want. And it might even do things that we are not expecting. So if we give it a lot of room to guess and to think for itself, it will try to fill the blanks as best as it can, but that might mean something different as what we expect. So it's important that we give it as more context and be as specific as we can. So, for example, if we are trying to do a validation function for email addresses, and we are expecting it to use a regex function, we should a regex string. We should say that and also specify what we are expecting it to return. So it could be something as simple as just returning a Boolean value, or like we could return something more complex like an object, which could have an error string that will explain a little bit more on the error that we're seeing. So something else that is really important is providing context. So that context can be provided in different ways. One of them is trying to be more descriptive of the error that we're trying to fix, what the expected outcome is. Another thing that I have found really helpful, especially with bigger code bases, is actually providing the files that we want to modify or where we know the functionality lives. So that way, the course is going to spend less time trying to find what we're asking it to do and where it should do it. And that will mean that it's able to do it faster. It's going to use less tokens for it. And also is going to have more bigger context window available for the actual tasks that it has to do instead of trying to use all that context window to parse all the project and to find the place that we are trying to change or the functions that we're trying to change. Also, another good tip is that if you already have like a design pattern that you want it to follow, that you can use as an example, you can also tell it that. So it will use that. Like if you have a function inside another file, you can tell it that it should follow that pattern, design pattern, and use that as an example for what you're asking it to build. It's also important that if we have some constraints on our project, so for example, if we are using TypeScript or if we are following again some specific design patterns, or we have some specific edge cases in mind, or things that we already know that we want to cover or that we don't want to cover also, because again, if we are broad with what we ask of it, it can try to cover a lot of different scenarios, which might not be what we want. So it might try to do something that has a lot of functionality when we are looking for something that is simpler. And then I think the most important one is keep iterating and refining what you're trying to do. So as we start with something really specific, it will help us see results quicker, validate that those results are what we're expecting, and then we can keep building on top of that. So something that I like to do is try to create a train of thought experiment or file where I start with a broader description of what I'm trying to do, what we are trying to accomplish, and ask Cursor to create a step-by-step process for accomplishing that. Then we can get into that file and review that process and change it to make sure that it complies with what we're wanting to do and that it has everything that we expect. And then we can use that same file to ask Cursor to follow up on those steps and iterate as we build. It's really important to review the results after each iteration, and also I recommend doing commits and saving your work periodically, because sometimes if you try, especially when you try to do something that is really complex or that involves a lot of files, you might end up with some broken code, or you might want to take a step back and try a different approach. So it's really helpful to have these checkpoints with GitHub where you can just go back. Cursor also provides an option to revert your changes and to go back to previous steps, but I think I find it more reliable to use GitHub or Git to save your progress as you go, and it's something that we are already really familiar with as developers. Um, there are different things that we can use Cursor for, so it's really easy, for example, to ask it to create a function so we can create comments on our code. Sometimes when I'm writing a new application, I already have an idea of what I wanted to do, and I will write pseudocode or just comments of what it should be doing. And then we can use that as a reference. We can select that and ask Cursor to build it based on that. So this is similar from what I was suggesting on the creating the steps file, that we can use then to build what we are trying to do. Another approach is if you are doing test-driven development, for example, you can take your test that you have already written and then ask Cursor to generate the actual functionality based on those tests. Now, let's dive into a little more in-depth demo. So we are going to build more complete task manager component. We will add different functionalities to it, and we will start from zero. So we will see the whole process of building something with Cursor uh, from from the ground. Okay, so here we have a new project. It's an empty folder, and we want to build a task manager. So first, we will ask Cursor to help us initialize the project, and we will just start with a simple view project. So let's tell it what we're going to do. So I already have some of the instructions here, so I'll paste them here, and then we will ask it to start doing that. So as you can see, it already is suggesting what we need to do, and then it has created the folder structure for it, and has all the files for it already in here. And now it's installing all the dependencies and everything for us. So we can see that it created the package.json file. We have a index file. We also have all the components, views, and everything for our app. And we should be able to run our dev command to get the app going. So as we can see, this has created a new server, and then we can open that, and this is just the boilerplate view app. Now, to actually start building the functionality into the app, we can start extracting cursor on what functionalities we want. So I think the basic things that we want to be able to add new tasks, we need to be able to display those tasks in our application. And maybe we can have some options for filtering or sorting those tasks. So as we can see, it's starting to create the code for us. So here, I didn't really give it much direction into what we are using to build it. So for example, we don't have a specific CSS framework in this case, or any patterns that we are asking it to follow. So that's something that when we are working on a production app will be important to do, to set up the rules that we want to follow and which frameworks we're using, which libraries we want to use, and if we have any other restrictions around them. And then as it builds and creates the files, it will tell us here like which files have been created, and we can review the changes. So that way we can decide if it's what we wanted, or if it's something that we don't like how it did, or not what we expected, we can always reject that part and either make changes manually ourselves or ask Cursor to do another change for us and do what we expected. So we will wait a little bit for it to finish writing everything. But I think that we can see here is that we already have like all the sensible files for it. So if we were to create a Git repository for this folder, it will work from the start, and it wouldn't add any of the files that should be ignored, for example. We can also see that it's being mindful about linter errors. So after it creates a file, if it finds that our linter is complaining about something, it will go back and fix the file for us and make sure that it's following the correct conventions for it. So while it does that, for example, we could go to the task list file that's built already, and then I'll accept it here, and then we can ask it to help us understand what it's doing. Well, we can see that it's finished uh, creating everything. So if we go to our browser window, we can now see that we have this task app that is already built for us and has all the things that we asked for. And we can just try it to see if it's actually working. So our first task was to create the base view project. So some of the examples of the decisions that it can take for you is like we told it that we wanted to have categories for each task, but we didn't really told it what categories we needed. So it created a list or guess a list of the categories that we could use, but this might not be what we expected. So again, as if we are more specific, we are going to get better results. Now we can see that the task that I just created is added here. And then we also see that it's updating the counters and everything. So if I complete that task, it should show here as completed, and it will also update the completion project. Something that I don't really like about this is that the UI is not responsive. It looks like it's mobile or optimized, but it's not really working good with this with my desktop. So we can ask it to make it more desktop friendly. Something that we could also see is that if I refresh the page, the tasks aren't here anymore. So that will be another functionality that we can ask it uh, to implement afterwards. So that way we can see how everything is stored in the local storage, or even we could try to do like a server side component so that it stores all the information inside a server. Something that I think that's also really interesting with Cursor is that we can take screenshots of the UI or the errors that we are getting, and then we can use that to give it context. So for example, here, it looks nicer than before, but still it's really mobile oriented. So I'll take a screenshot of it and I'll share that with Cursor so it understands a little bit better what we're trying to do. So I just pasted the screenshot here and I'll share that with it. So here we can see how, based on the screenshot, it proposes different things that we can change and then creates a plan for it, and then it will start implementing it. So now we can see that even though there's still room for improvement, This is a lot better than what we started with. We can have the task here again, and but still, if we refresh the page, we will lose everything. So now we can ask it to help us add that functionality, and it will do something really similar to what we were seeing on the previous example. Some other tips that I have is um, sometimes the path that cursor will take is we will try to build everything like in one file, in one big file. So I find it useful to always ask it to do it in a modular way, something that is more easy to maintain in the long run and more extensible. And that will also allow you to make changes faster. Because if you're working with just one big file, it will have a hard time trying to read all the file every time and making changes to the full file every time. So now with it updated, you should be able to add the task, and then if we reload the window, we can see that it's been stored. And if we complete the task and we reload again, then we can see that it was created already here. Um, we can add some other tasks, and we can even add different priorities. So this will be high priority. And then we can use this to, for example, filter the tasks based on priority or based on due date or other properties that we want to ask. We can also use these controls to filter and do different things. So as we can see, this is something that we're able to build fairly quickly. There are some, again, there are some areas of improvement, like some spacing on the UI. Maybe we wanted to change some of the functionality or some of the categories that we have, but I think that where Cursor really excels is in helping us build all the boilerplate for the projects and let us focus on the actual functionality that we want. Think about the business logic that we need, all the architectural decisions, and just let Cursor do the heavy lifting for us, and, and then we can review and make sure that it's actually doing what we expected it to do, and we can just then continue working. And then we can also ask it to create unit tests for app. So it will do something similar that as we saw before. In this case, it's designed to use a different testing tool. So in this case, it's using BitTest, which is more suitable with a Vue 3 and Byte application. So it will be aware of what you're using and some of the tools that might be better, but that's not always the case. So if you already have something in mind, it's better if you provide the context on what do you want to use and how do you expect it to use it. So I'll just let it create those tests in the background and we will continue with our presentation. So some of the mistakes that we have seen is again just being too vague about what we are asking it to do, not reviewing what we created. So for example, right now we just uh, went very quickly and we didn't really get into what the code generated actually did. So it's really important that when we're building a production app, something that we want to ship, that we actually take the time to review what is being written for us and which decisions cursor is taking for us. So that way we know that not only that the app works, but that it's following the best practices that we're expecting and that there is nothing like weird going on. We need to remember that the way these tools work is that they use code that they have been trained on. So that will be code that is open source, code that it's found online. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be the best solution or the best code. So we need to be very aware of what we are building, how we're building it, and make sure that we give the correct direction to it. Also, like, especially when we're working with bigger code bases, it's important to give more context to the cursor. So when we are chatting with it, for example, we can use the add command to give it to tell you like which files we want to look into, or if we are using a specific framework and we have documentation for it, we can share that with it, and that way it will know where to look for it. There are things that we can use, so like we could use reference a specific commit, a specific branch, for example, or the terminal that we saw before when we selected the error on the terminal. And we can even create custom rules for our project, so that way we can we can give it some guidelines as to what we're expecting. So, for example, this is a rule for view tree. We can tell it to make sure to always follow solid principles, create components for reusable code, create tests for it for new functionality. So this will allow us to create these baseline rules that is going to always follow, and we can choose here. We want them to always apply. We want them to try to decide when it's relevant, or we only want to do it with some type of files. So, for example, if we have some rules into how to write our CSS code, we could use that here, or if we have like some special rules on how to document or TypeScript files, that can also be done. And also, if it's a rule that only applies in some very specific cases, we can say that it should be applied manually, and then we will need to actually reference it when we want to use it. Another usual mistake is trying to build everything in one go and not trying to iterate. So if we want to do something that it's really ambitious and we want to build a lot of functionality in one go, is there is a really high probability that it's not going to go as we expected. So either the code is not going to be the best quality because it might try to cover too much at once, and then it will forget some of the rules that we are asking it, or it might go in a different direction than what we expect. So I always recommend that we give it more specific instruction and we try to break down the work that we are going to do into something that is more manageable for it. And again, another mistake is just trying to make Cursor do everything for us. So I think these tools are really powerful, especially when we already have an idea of what we're trying to accomplish, about how we should accomplish that, and when we actually still do the design of the application itself or the architecture of the application and use Cursor to help us do the heavy lifting. Some other techniques that we can use to help us write code faster and to automate some of our process is, like I said, just using Cursor for scaffolding. So we can use it to help us build components, to help us build different validation rules, to help us refactor code that we already have. So it's really good in extracting code and moving it around. Also, creating tests, as we saw, we can ask it to create a test either for a specific file or a functionality, and that will help us get started really quickly. And then we can go into the test and tweak it, or if we have some edge cases that we already know of, we can ask it to implement those. And I think another interesting thought experiment is asking Cursor to help us identify edge cases that we might not have thought of. So I think that's something where it's really good when we don't have thought of everything. We can use it as a tool to help us discover new things that might be an issue. Um, yeah, like creating API endpoints and all those tasks that are usually really repetitive and that don't really have that much business logic in them. It's really good to help us write that, to help us create documentation, and then we can just focus on the actual parts that need to have business logic on them. Um, some other tips, some other things that we can do is like select code that we are trying to review, and we can ask it to help us review the code for issues or to refactor it for better readability, or even just to create docs. So I found this is really helpful when working with bigger code bases, for example, where you have like a specific part of it that you want to work on. So you can just go to that specific file and ask it to change it for you or to explain it to you. So whenever you are new to a project too, it's really helpful to use these kind of tools for so that way you can get acquainted with the project and get up to speed quicker than trying to figure out everything yourself. Some other tips, especially when trying to debug an issue, is that it's really tempting to just say, this doesn't work, fix it for me. But that usually won't lead to the best solutions or to the best results, and might get you stuck in a couple of tries uh, before it actually figures out what you're trying to fix or what the problem is. So it's important to remember the steps that we usually take when trying to debug an issue. So we need to identify the problem, at least the symptoms of the problem, and be give, as descriptive with it as we can. So that way it can have as much context to help us actually figure out what the problem is. So if we are seeing like errors in the console, or if we are seeing that a function should be returning something but it's not doing what we expected, that's really helpful context for us to give Cursor, and that will help us get to a solution quicker. Well, so this is like a hands-on exercise for everyone in the call that you could try. I mean, you could try it like a really quick way to get familiarized with it. So I'm suggesting trying to ask it to build a password validator that has some requirements. So this is something that we see normally in many web applications where when the user is trying to input a password, it should meet some of these requirements. So I think this is a interesting problem to try, and it will help us also try different approaches. So I'll suggest that the first approach is just getting a response whether the strength is sufficient enough or not, and that will be like your first validation step. But then you can add feedback on each of these validation rules, and that's something then you could show to the user and iterate over this functionality until you get something that is complete and actually provides enough context to the user to know what's wrong with their password, if they're doing it correctly. So I'll leave this for you as like a take-home exercise, and then we can move now to the questions section.
Awesome, Marco. Thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah, just a couple of questions here. One is how much efficiency have you experienced while using Cursor, Marco?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and it, it's something that really depends on the approach that you take. So I've seen that if you just try to make Cursor do everything for you, and you are not mindful about what you're asking and what you're expecting it from it can actually be slower than like a workflow, like a normal workflow, because you will end up uh, asking it to do a lot of changes and uh, reverting a lot of it too. So I think that's really important for you to actually think about what you're trying to accomplish, come up with a plan before, and then you can start asking the tools to do work for you and to start creating boilerplate. So if you take that approach, I think that at least you can see like a 30% increase in productivity, and it will also allow you to spend that time like while it's actually building stuff for you and doing building code in the back, thinking about what the next steps are and designing architecture. So it will allow you to be more productive in two ways. One is, yeah, time wise, but I think the other one is that going to be able to build more quality applications that are more maintainable and that have less errors on them.
Right, right, right. And just curious that we've seen a lot of changes in Cursor since it was released. Also, we're using new models and everything. But what do you see in the future of Cursor, Marco? And I think, I
Yeah,
mean, in
so
general, of all of these tools to help code.
yeah, so I think something that it's really interesting with Cursor and also with Cloud right now, which has just released the Cloud Code companion too, is the concept of background agents. So a background agent is an agent that will run in the background. It can run either on your local computer, but it can also run on the cloud. So you could run it against GitHub Actions, for example, and that's something that can always be running and can always be working on your code. So that way, for example, whenever you get a new pull request in your repository, you can have Cursor review that pull request for you and try to identify new possible issues with that, or also to make changes to the code based on rules that you give it. So you already have like a style rule that you needed, or even like if you want to have tests for everything and the pull request doesn't have that. So for example, maybe open source project where there are some users that are contributing, but they might not be as tech savvy, or they might not be like, already familiar with how to write tests. I have seen that that's it, and like a bottleneck in many projects where some users will try to contribute to the project, and then maybe the functionality that they are trying to do it works and it works correctly, but since they don't know how to write unit tests, for example, it will never get merged or stuff like that. So,
Right.
so I think that's really helpful. Another thing is that doing migrations, doing upgrades to a project are things that can be automated with these type of agents. That's will be also really helpful because they can run everything for you on the cloud. So whenever a new version of the library that you're using gets released, it will do the update automatically. And if you have already tests in place for your project, it will run the tests for you and make sure that they are passing. And if something is failing, it will analyze what it's doing again and then try to fix it in orderly way. So I think that's really interesting. Another thing with agents now is the the way that they are thinking of how you should be building things. So one of my suggestions was when we are asking it to do something that's more complex and that has many steps, trying to break it down into more manageable steps and using like a context file, for example, to keep track of what has been built, what decisions has been made along the path. But now these new agents are already implementing that kind of reasoning, so they're able to create a plan for building new functionalities, and then they will follow that plan step by step, which helps get better results, and it also helps you understand better the decisions that are being taken.
Right. So you think Cursor will take this new approach that is having cloud code with agents?
Yeah, so they are already doing a little bit of it.
Hmm.
Uh, I think they're on a good path, but yeah, I think that the way that Cloud is doing it right now, at least it's a little more advanced because Cloud is able to even orchestrate many agents at the same time. So if you are working on different functionalities that are not affecting the same files, or they are not stepping over each other, it can run in parallel and it can do things faster.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. One last question, Marco. What other tools would you recommend to use as well as Cursor? I mean, other than Cloud Code, is there any other tool that you could recommend to in order to use it or increase your efficiency in coding,
Um,
or something
well,
that you
I
are
think that
exploring?
yeah. So I think that for example with Cloud, not only thinking about code, but I think it's really useful for creating mockups too. So well, like especially as developers, we don't always have like a good UI background, and we might not have like, the best abilities into trying to build something that is usable or that takes like user experience into account. So I have seen that it's really useful to bounce some ideas on cloud and use the web interface with it to describe like the functionalities that you're trying to build, and help it. It will help you create like different design options that then you can try and see as mockups. So I think that's really helpful. It's trying to decide like which design um, decisions you're going to take without having to try to build the full functionality around it first and
Got it.
testing out in production. So that's also a really helpful tool to create these mockups, and then you can share that with stakeholders, so that way they can see and test the mockups before actually trying to build them into our production apps.
And how are you sharing this information that cloud is generating with Cursor? With screenshots or something? Or just describing?
No, so you can. I mean, there are different ways to do it. So it will literally create like an interactive mockup for you with code that you can copy and share, like using CodePen, for example. But then also it has the option to share something directly, so it will create a public link that you can share with your customers or your stakeholders, and that they can interact with directly on the Corso platform. So I think it depends on your requirements and also privacy concerns. So if you don't want to have a public link on the net, it's better to download the files and to just share them internally or through a repository, something like that,
Right, right, right.
or
Okay.
just screenshots too. It works too, depending
Yeah, yeah,
on how complex it is.
yeah, exactly. We could make it easy. All right, Marco. Well, just to the audience, that's everything for today. Thank you for the presentation and your time, Marco. So have a good day, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye bye.